Hello, everybody. This is Suneve, and I'm coming to you with Chains and Eyeless Jack X Raider. We're going to be starting with chapter 28. It's Jack's POV. Jack sat in his armchair next to the window, staring out as rain pelted the glass and obscured the forest beyond. Rain clouds obscured the sun, making it nearly as dark as nighttime despite it being the middle of the afternoon. Only a single lamp illuminated the interior of the cabin, leaving the majority cloaked in shadows and darkness. Storms always soothed Jack for some reason, and he loved the rhythmic sound of rain pounding against the roof and the low rumbling of thunder. There was a creak from the depths of the cabin, and he turned his head slightly to see her peeking outside her bedroom door cautiously. Her brown eyes seemed to glow against her face in the dim light, bringing to mind the first time he'd seen her. A smirk briefly crossed his lips at the memory, bittersweet as it was, before he called. "Why in?" The girl flinched slightly and slowly looked at him, her hand tightly gripping the frame of the door. Tilting his head, he asked, "Something on your mind?" She didn't respond right away, but then shrugged. Not really." Frowning, Jack rose from the armchair and walked to the bathroom, fishing around the drawers before returning to stand in front of her. She leaned back slightly as he stopped in front of her, but didn't move to leave. "Open your mouth." When she hesitated again, he gave a small growl. "Why in?" Immediately her mouth popped open, and he quickly stuck a thermometer under her tongue. A look of pure confusion filled her face, her eyes crossing slightly to look at the white thermometer sticking out of her mouth, making Jack smirk under his mask. He remained still until the thermometer beeped, at which point he quickly snatched it from her mouth, peering at the little screen he sighed and mumbled, "Yep, small temperature." Wyan just looked at him in shock for a few moments before speaking. How did you... I used to be in med school, you know. I can tell when someone's sick." "You were in med school?" Her tone was full of surprise and disbelief, making him smirk under his mask once more. "Yeah, a long time ago. How do you think I know so much about organs?" "Experience?" He chuckled at her answer and would have rolled his eyes if he had any. Wyan frowned, looking puzzled. "But how did you—" She trailed off, but he already knew what she wanted to ask. "Did you think I was born looking like this? I used to be human, you know." The look of surprise and disbelief on her face was priceless, and he smirked as he went to return the thermometer in the bathroom. "But you were, but how are you human?" "Not sure," he admitted as he stepped back into the hallway. "Just woke up in a field one day with no eyeballs and a craving for kidneys. But memories are pretty fuzzy, and it only got worse as time went by. But I remember useful things like driving. Remember how I drove you here?" "I remember," she muttered, nodding. "Now, how do you think I learned to drive? I can't exactly find a teacher when I look, well, like this." He chuckled. Discussing it felt pretty weird, and Jack didn't really think about his previous life too much. He saw no point in it. As time passed, his memories faded more and more, and he couldn't even remember his full name anymore, only that he was called Jack, and for all he knew, he was a Jackson, or Jonathan, or even a Jaquise. Not that his inability to remember bothered him, though. He was pretty content with his current life. As he mulled over this, spoke, her voice soft and thoughtful. "And yet you couldn't remember how to make a bowl of cereal. Are you ever going to let that slide?" He grumbled, frowning, and she shook her head with a small smirk. "You terrify me for fun and keep me chained to a bed. At least give me that much." Sighing, he grabbed her arm and led her inside the bedroom, gently pushing her on the bed. "Go to sleep," he said, and then gave a small chuckle as he thought of Jeff. Wyan shot him a curious glance, but didn't ask about it, probably for the best. "I'm not tired, though," she protested, and he tossed a book at her, making her yelp as she dodged it before he could hit her face. "Hey, be careful." "Just read that until you fall asleep," he instructed, ignoring her complaint. Grumbling, she turned so she faced away from him and opened the book. He chuckled at the sight and saw a small shudder run down her back at his voice. Smirking, he soundlessly walked over and wrapped his arms around her neck from behind, making her yelp and give a small jolt. This only made him chuckle more. "Calm down, Ryan," he whispered into her ear. "It's just a hug. You're so jumpy." She turned her head slightly, casting him a slightly frantic look. "But please let go," she whispered, and when he merely tilted his head in response, she added, "Jack, it still kind of hurts." It took a few moments for him to realize what she meant, and he quickly released her neck. Sighing in relief, she gingerly raised a hand to touch the bandages wrapping it, wincing ever so slightly at her own gentle touch. Jack frowned at the sight. He'd forgotten about her neck. Was it still bruised? Over a week had passed since then, and if it were him, it would have been healed by now. But then again, he wasn't exactly human like her. Watching her silently for a moment, he then sighed and turned, walking to the door. She glanced at him but didn't say anything, quickly returning her attention to the book. Closing the door, Jack returned to the armchair and settled in, staring out the window. Listening to the rhythmic pounding of the rain, he found his eyelids fluttering and slowly closed his eyes, letting the rain lull him to sleep. A triumphant smirk filled Jack's face, the blood of that putrid man swishing around in his mouth. Currently, his captor was upstairs, washing off the blood from Jack's bite and tending his hand. That it was a small bite, and it was still a victory for Jack, and he felt triumphant and victorious, for so long he'd been helpless, and while this victory might be small, the fact it occurred at all was humongous. There was a loud creak and slam as the basement door opened, and slow footsteps descending the stairs. For once Jack turned his head to the stairway, watching his captor appear. Bandages swathed his palm, and in his other hand he carried a black canvas bag. His face was devoid of its usual twisted grin, replaced by an expression of no emotion. "You know, Jackie, it's rude to bite people," he commented, sitting in front of Jack. "You know, it's even ruder to hold a person prisoner in a basement," Jack growled, bearing his teeth dyed red by the man's own blood. The man didn't respond, but then sighed. "You are really such an inconsiderate pet," he grumbled. "I feed you, I water you, I even clean you up after little accidents." Jack's smirk faded at the comment, his expression fading to a smoldering glare. Merely mentioning that made him feel humiliated to the point he just wanted to hide. After a moment, the man continued, "You are quite ungrateful, Jack. I don't have to do that, you know." "You're right, you don't," Jack agreed, his voice low. "So why don't you let me go and I'll pretend this never happened and not tear out your throat?" At this, the man chuckled. "Aw, what a sweet offer. Although you should know better than to lie to me at this point." The man reached forward and patted Jack's head, ruffling his hair. Jack winced at the contact and tried to move away, the chain suspending his arms rattling. Growling, he tried to bite him again, but the man quickly withdrew his hand. His captor's eyes hardened as he shook his head, speaking in a low tone. "Trying to bite me again? Tisk tisk, Jackie. You're only making things worse for yourself." Worse, Jack thought. Worse how? He was already being held prisoner by a madman kept as some sort of pet. As if hearing his thoughts, the man reached for the bag. Immediately Jack tensed, watching warily as he sorted through the bag. "Jackie, have you ever heard the saying, 'Don't bite the hand that feeds you'?" he asked, his tone light and casual. "Well, it's quite literal in this case. I've been taking care of you for weeks now, but since you want me to leave you alone, then fine. I'll give you your space." For a brief moment, Jack's heart felt lighter. A relapse from this man was just what he needed. However, his joy quickly faded. "What's the catch?" he asked warily, his hollow eyes narrowing suspiciously. The man turned to look at him with the most twisted grin, yet sending shudders down his spine. Chapter 29. Author's Note. Warning, this chapter contains a non-gory, intense psychological torture scene. Reader's POV. Running and panting. I can't stop now. He has to keep running. Blood trickles down from the cut on his forehead, his head throbbing. He wants to hold it, but he can't. His arms are tied behind his back, and he's being chased, crazed woman with a knife. One rejection, one turned down date. How was he supposed to know that girl was batshit insane? How was he supposed to know she was a crazy stalker who would kidnap him? He needed to get away fast and couldn't let himself get caught. He turns the corner nearly out of breath now and sees a glass door. Outside, get outside. He can't use his hands, so he rams it with his body as hard as he can, shattering glass shards fly through the air and pierce his body. But he can get outside now. He has to get help. Suddenly, the lights flickered and darkness fell, making me jump in bed with a yelp. Heart pounding furiously, I glanced around in shock for a moment before realizing what had happened. A blackout. The power must have gone out. At least I wasn't blind like I'd thought. Groaning softly, I groped blindly for my bookmark to mark my place before setting down the book, a bit annoyed to be interrupted at such a climactic moment. Sighing, I flopped on my back and stared at the ceiling, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. Even then, I wouldn't be able to read, though. Of all the times for the power to go out, it just had to be at the climax, didn't it? Typical. So typical. Kidnapped, almost killed, chained to a bed by a cannibalistic monster, and getting sick. Luck was just against me lately, wasn't it? I groaned softly at the thought, scowling at the darkness. "Stupid storm," I grumbled. Like this, my options were to go back to sleep or think, and I was too energized by the story's climax, not to mention I felt really hot, and right now I was tired of thinking. Maybe there was a third option, though. I could always ask Jack for a candle or something. While he probably wouldn't trust me with fire, maybe he'd trust me with a flashlight at least. Sure, we weren't on the best terms lately, but right now I really wanted to finish the story. From the looks of his bookshelf, I felt like he was a bit of a bibliophile, so he'd probably understand why I was so desperate for an alternate light source. With this in mind, I got up carefully and made my way to the door. The rest of the cabin was just as dark as my room, and I slowly stepped into the hall. "Jack?" I called tentatively. No response. Swallowing, I raised my voice a little. "Jack?" When he still didn't respond, I carefully made my way to the main portion of the cabin, reaching the end of the hall before the train caught. I could make out Jack's dark form in the armchair, slumped slightly. Was he asleep or something? Suddenly he twitched, and I sucked in a breath, stepping back and making the chain rattle slightly. However, Jack didn't seem to react to me, instead just grunting and shifting slightly. Was he having a dream? As I watched him twitch again, he gave another small grunt. The noise he made reminded me of videos of pets and other animals having nightmares. For a second, I sarcastically thought, what could he possibly dream about that's so bad? And then I remembered the photos and video on Buddy's account and froze. Oh, right. There were plenty of things to plague his dreams. Watching him silently, I frowned as he twitched and emitted a small whimper. Part of me wanted to wake him up, but another part of me knew he'd probably attack me, not out of anger, but out of pure reflex. Especially if he was dreaming about Buddy like I thought. Mentally grappling myself, I eventually decided it would be best to just let it play out. Besides, it's not like I could go over there with a chain. Sighing, I reluctantly returned to my room and laid on the bed. All I could do now was hope I'd make the right decision. Jack's POV. Straining against his restraints, Jack leaned back until his head was pushing against the wall as his captor leaned forward, holding a piece of duct tape above his mouth. "Stay still, Jackie," the man ordered as Jack quickly jerked his head before the tape could be placed on him. Impatient, his captor shot out a hand to grasp Jack's hair and gave it a hard yank, making Jack gasp in pain and grit his teeth as his head was forced upright. As soon as his mouth closed, the tape was slapped over it, muting his voice. "Looks like you can't bite me any more, can you?" Jack glared at the man, a dull red light appearing in his sockets. He struggled to open his mouth and growl, but the tape held his mouth shut, rendering him only able to grunt. So this was his punishment for biting him, to have his mouth taped up? No matter, Jack didn't have anything to say to him anyway. Internally sighing, he let his body relax and lowered his gaze, waiting for the man to leave. However, his captor remained and began rooting through the bag once more. "Well, now that that's taken care of, let's get on to the rest, shall we?" At this, Jack tensed once more, his head snapping upwards. His captor held up a blue plastic jar, unscrewing the lid to reveal some sort of cream. Dabbing a bit on his fingers, he crouched in front of Jack with that twisted grin. "Hold still." Jack lurched and tried to avoid him, but his chains held him in place, and the man easily rubbed the cream just below Jack's nose. Immediately, a chemical smell taunted his nose, making him wince, and after a few moments he smelled nothing. As he pondered this, the man suddenly stuck a strip on his nose, making him wince more. "Can you smell anything?" the man asked, and Jack just glared at him. "Come now, don't be like that. I need to know. Just nod or shake your head, okay?" Reluctantly, he shook his head, indicating he couldn't smell anything, and the man grinned. "Good boy." He ruffled Jack's hair, making him emit a muffled cry as he flinched and tried to pull away. Chuckling at his discomfort, the man returned to the bag and began fishing around some more. "Now, what should I do next? He removed a black strip of cloth and set of headphones, glancing between them thoughtfully while Jack stared. Realization finally set in, his hollow eyes slowly widening. First a smell, now a blindfold and headphones. He wasn't just making him mute, he was cutting off all of Jack's senses. Panicked, he began thrashing violently, the metal ball-like casings on his hands banging against the wall and ringing like bells. For the most part, his captor ignored Jack's struggles, still glancing between his two torture devices. I think I'll go with this," he said, holding up the blindfold. Jack's hollow eyes widened even more, and his thrashing it intensified as the man approached, holding the black strip of cloth. "Hold still, Jackie." Black tears began dripping down Jack's face as the man forced the cloth around his hollow eyes, cutting off his vision and sending him into darkness. All he had now was sound, but he knew it wouldn't last long. His body heaved as a single sob pulsated through him, frantically tugging at the chains and listening to the links rattle and clink against each other. A series of muffled grunts escaped his throat, and his metal mitts rang as they banged against the wall again. Above it all, he could hear a deep, ominous chuckle, a low sound full of twisted amusement. Fingers suddenly pressed against Jack's chin, and he sucked in a sharp breath, a shudder running down his spine as he felt his head tilt back. "You brought this on yourself, Jack. If you would have just behaved, none of this would be happening, and you want me to leave you alone? Oh, and I will. I'll give you all the time you need, and I'll let you live in your own little world as long as you like." Tears streamed down Jack's face at this point as he began shaking, feeling too weak to struggle anymore. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be. A pressure descended upon his ears, muffling the sounds to a vague buzz. Shuddering, he heard his captor's voice one last time. Goodbye, Jack. I'll see you soon. And then a low hum rang through his ears, and he became isolated from the world, trapped in a void all alone. Gasping, Jack lurched in his seat and bolted upright, his heart pounding. There was a bright flash of light illuminating the interior of the cabin, followed by the loud splitting roar of thunder. His heart pounded as he sat there, trembling in silence. Rain pounded against the cabin loudly, and each dropped like a small explosion against the roof. He used the violent rhythm to calm himself and let his heart beat steady. Another nightmare. Biting his lip, he grabbed at his head and gripped the ends of his hair tightly, taking several deep, shuddery breaths. It was a dream. It was over. He wasn't in that place anymore. He was safe, but he was dead. He was alone. He felt alone. He felt like he was back in the void, all alone with no light or sound or smell. Awful, horrible, lonely. He couldn't take it anymore. He needed to get out. He didn't want to be alone. He wanted YN. Jack rose from the chair, his movements feeling automatic as he slowly made his way to the back hallway. Her door was open, and his superior night vision allowed him a perfect view of her. Peering inside, he saw her tossing and turning, the covers strewn haphazardly from her constant shifting. Silently watching her for a few moments, he turned and went to his room, fishing around one of his drawers. When he returned, he knocked on the door frame, and she gave a start, snapping her head to look at him with wide brown eyes. Wordlessly, he tossed her a small penlight, landing on the bed beside her. Surprised, she looked at it for a moment before slowly picking it up, turning it over in her hand, and pressing a button. A bright light came from the end, making her give another little start, but then she smiled slightly at Jack. Thanks, she said. Jack didn't reply, he just stood there staring at her. After a moment, he stepped inside the room and slid against the wall, removing another penlight from his pocket along with a book. YN seemed surprised, but didn't say anything and just began to quietly read her own book. As he read the pages, Jack kept sneaking glances at her, unnoticed as she focused on her book. He wasn't alone, and he never was as long as he had her. At that moment, he finally understood why he couldn't kill her and why he could never let her go. That is the end of those two chapters. The chapter after that is chapter 30. Let me know what you guys think, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye!